Okay, we're live, ready to go.
No doubt. Well, I'll just open up, at least introduce myself, my brother. Of course, Hotel Peace. Greetings to all those who are joining us and may get a chance to view this at another time. My name is Baba Aundar Ma'at. I am the co-founder of Melaneyes Media. Of course, we're an independent film company based out of San Antonio, and our focus is on our story, the Black story, the history of us as a people from ancient time to modern time. Of course, I'm always honored to be on with my brother, my business partner, as we have these Black conversations, you know, creating a space where we can talk about things that are important and relevant to us. And of course, brother, I know, I think we have something that we both very excited about kind of sharing today. So, you know, if you just kind of introduce yourself and then we can kind of introduce the subject.
Absolutely. Peace and greetings, family. I'm Born Logic Allah. Most people call me Logic for short. I'm the co-founder of Melaneyes Media. And excited to be able to have these Tuesday conversations. It's really a way for us to just express our thoughts, but also to give our audience and our supporters an added bonus. You know, when we have our presentations that are more formal, one of the great things that we really love to do is just have dialogue around the topics. And so this gives us more of an opportunity just really to talk about some of the things that we think are important, just things that's thoughts on our mind. And so today what we have done, we've chosen two quotes that we're going to take a look at and just kind of break them down and give our opinions and our thoughts on them. So right now, what I'm going to do really quickly, just switch to my screen share here so we can see the quotes and so that you all can see them. And we will go from there. And so, Baba Aundar, I know the first one that you had was from Mr. Schomburg.
Yes. You know, I think this quote, you know, many times kind of jumps out at me because I first heard this quote being shared by Dr. John Henry Clark, of course, one of our great historians, ancestors. And he was saying that he had went to visit Mr. Schomburg and had wanted to know our history. And of course, Mr. Schomburg, being a great historian himself, sat him down and told him basically what you see here on the screen, family, and that is what you're calling African history, Negro history, are the missing pages of world history. And I think that's just so profound because you know, many times, but I know you have said, and we recognize the fact that we are the original people. I'm talking about people of African descent. And when you talk about our time frame, timeline in history, of course, if we are the original people and really no one knows the date, because they seem to continue to find fossil remains of African people in the world that dates back millions of years. But if we could just go back 200,000 years, if we talk about Homo sapiens, then we're talking about if we have a 20 chapter book, we pretty much cover the first 15 chapters of the book, you know. But many times we're taught that we start at chapter 15, and that's the beginning of world history. And pretty much world history centers around Eurocentric history. So, you know, I think this quote really raises the question of what we're calling world history is really Eurocentric history or Euro-Western history. And what is missing is, of course, our history. And that's why, you know, of course, we do what we do at Melaneyes Media, but that's why many people are doing this work, trying to restore the missing pages of world history. So I just open up like that, my brother, and then we can go from there.
And you know, when I look at this quote, what you're calling African history, Negro history, are the missing pages of world history. I think what it really lets us know that our history is really the foundation of the story. And you can't tell world history without including us because once again, whether people like it or not, the fact remains that we are the mothers and fathers of civilization and the oldest people on the planet. And I'm gonna say it like that because if we're really talking about length and time, then we have to acknowledge that so much comes from Black people. And to say that, I know people don't fully understand or sometimes grasp that concept, but it's a shift in a mindset that really needs to take place, not just for us as a people, but for everybody on the planet. We really need to start looking at our history through a different lens. Everyone does, not just Black people, everyone does, because you cannot have a conversation, an honest conversation about history and not understand all of the contributions that we have made to civilization. And I think the other thing that we have to realize is that so much documented information was available on the continent before empires in Europe ever existed. We had so much information stored and housed, written information, because that's the other thing. People try to make it seem like our history was strictly oral, and that's not true either. We had a written history, we had a language, we had a documented story. And I think it's important to understand that a lot of those things were destroyed. And when something is destroyed, that's not by happenstance or coincidence. That was a calculated move. And so to understand history or the occurrences that have happened in our past, we have to understand the longevity and, once again, the contributions and the foundation of the original people, which are Black people.
No, it's an excellent point, brother. And I definitely want to just add to that. And that is to say that when you talk about that oral history and written history, true enough, brother, we have a written history, family. And I think this is sometimes what is definitely denied and even rejected. But the idea is that we have this history, and I've shared with you where when we had a chance to visit Kemet, or Egypt, in 1999, and I definitely saw, our ancestors where they recorded history in stone, of course, being the inventors of paper from the papyrus plant, we had a written language, and we used that written language to record much of what we had learned in our history, this journey here on this earth. And I think, when you look at the idea that someone would go into a book and rip out those pages, refuse to acknowledge those pages in history, then of course you have to ask why. And we'll get down to that a little bit later. But the idea is that, what you open up really is the fact that we have a history that truly is an amazing history. And when we go in and study this history and know this history, then we can tell this story and feel, uplifted, honored to be connected with this history. So I really appreciate what Alturo Schomburg really tried to tell and share with Dr. Clark, and of course, put him on the path, or assisted him on the path of uncovering our history. And of course, that's what Dr. Clark committed his life to, was sharing our story. And I think that's a noble work to do, is to restore this world history, these missing pages of world history. And now, and the last thing, let me just say this, brother, and I know we all have taken courses and things and to various degrees from junior high to high school up to college. And many times when we look at history, they talk about world history. I remember having a book on world art, the world of art. And I remember in that book, they started with European artists, famous European artists, and they only had one page or one chapter, really. It wasn't even a chapter, it was a couple of pages of what they referred to as the African history or the Negro history in art. And I think in that book, I recall they talked about the great, of course, John Biggers. But the idea is that everything else was centered around someone else's history. But go ahead, my brother. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think we have to always remember another quote, the winners of the wars write the history. So people tend to tell things from their own personal perspective. And that's why we have a view of the story that we have, because people have told it from their own perspective, from their own vantage point. And that's why it's really important, even family history, to tell it from a collective standpoint, because when we think about, I think about my grandmother, my grandfather, I have a specific time frame that I remember them, a certain light that I remember them in. However, I might have to speak to my mom, to my cousins, to my aunts and my uncles to get a better perspective of who they were as individuals, because each person has their own view and vantage point.
No doubt. Excellent.
And I think that kind of brings us to our second quote. The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history, which comes from George Orwell, who I think at this point has to be one of the most important authors of our time. And I don't think I could fully understand or appreciate the book 1984 until I see these times that we are in today, when I see so much of the things that he wrote about, I believe in 1948, that are crystal clear and really come into life and to light. So understanding a way to destroy a people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history, which reminds me of the concept of menticide that we've been speaking about a lot lately. When you don't know the roots, your own roots, you can't survive as a tree. You're definitely not going to bear bountiful and plentiful fruit. And so that's one of the reasons why we have the image of the tree here, is because if you really think about it, the roots of a tree, and if we're talking about that tree being life, in general, the roots are the history. And there's a very clear comparison when you think about roots. They keep the tree foundated, just like our history does. They're not necessarily visible or seen, just like our history. Sometimes you got to dig them up, just like our history. The roots actually supply the water and sustenance from the soil to even bring up through the trunk and to provide for the fruit, just like our history provides us sustenance to be able to give to our fruit, which is honestly our children. And so it's a great analogy to understand a tree, and also to understand how it relates to life. But once again, just understanding that our roots are our history.
No doubt. And it reminds me, I think it might have been Marcus Garvey, Honorable Marcus Garvey, who basically saying that a people without the knowledge of their history, it's like a tree without roots. And of course, as you just pointed out, brother, definitely if the tree has no roots, it ultimately is a tree designed to die. And this on his deathbed in many ways. So when you look at this quote by George Orwell, I really think about, brother, I know we've had this conversation where we understand if a people denied their history, or if their history is denied in world history, basically you're denying the humanity of those people, because it's human beings that ultimately make and record history. And when you say a people have not done anything to record, you're basically saying they have not been human. And I think this is why people go to great lengths sometimes to deny or destroy history, because it feeds into, of course, the abuse, mistreatment, of course, the Ma'afa, the African Holocaust that has taken place in history. But the idea is that it seems to calm the soul of some. But the fact is, our struggle is to reclaim our history, is to raise up our history, because ultimately, and I just think, ultimately, in restoring our history is the restoring of our ancestors. I heard a brother say, and I thought it was just very profound, saying that our ancestors can never be free until we free our history, until we tell their story fully and completely. And so our struggle and our responsibility as here, as the descendants of those who have come before us, is to free our ancestors, and you free your ancestors by telling their story, reclaiming their humanity.
Mhm. You know, I think I know both of us individuals that love and spend time with history, that go into the books, you know, do the research. I know that it's something that we enjoy. And I guess I'm always surprised when people are not into it, because I personally love it. Um, and I think one of the things that sometimes we rob ourselves of when we don't have a liking to history is an understanding of present conditions. And so when we see people toiling and seeking and searching for answers, if you're not in tune with what has taken place, you're never going to fully understand what's happening today. And so when I see people that are commenting and making commentation on today's societal conditions, if they're not rooted in history, they don't fully have a true view of what's going on. And I'll give you an example, because right now in our current financial climate, you know, people are really looking at, are we in a recession? What's going to happen? And economists and financial students look at history. When you talk about the stock market, they have a very clear indication of the charts of what has taken place in certain cycles, because these cycles are known to repeat. Now, if we understand this from something as what people may think is unpredictable as the stock market, if they look at historical data, how can we in society not look at data from our past and understand that these same types of cycles repeat themselves and continue to perform in certain ways at certain times? So when we see certain financial climates, and you can tell, well, hey, in 2008 this happened, in the late 1970s this took place, and then apply it to today, the same concept, the same mentality, the same methods can be used even with our history and society, with people. And so for us as a people, we have, in my opinion, we have to be in tune with history. And we have to get away from the separation of young and old, because I sometimes feel like that's a divide that also contributes to that. Well, older people worry about history. No, young people should be more worried about history, because you can help dictate the future if you're more in tune with it. And so I always strive to, at least with my children, let them know the importance of understanding the past and to be attracted to the past, because it's a seed for what we can see in the future. And also because something that's happening today that you think may be new may not be new. And it's important for us to understand that too. And that brings me to another quote: there's nothing new under the sun. That's because our life and our world moves in cycles, and we really have to, and that's an Eastern mentality as opposed to a Western concept of linear history. That's why they have a timeline as if there's a true beginning and a true end, when that's really not the case. It's more cyclical. That's why in the Eastern way of thinking and from the continent, it was more about cycles. It's about the circle, because these things reoccur over and over and over and recycle themselves just time and time again. So not to go on a tangent, but just wanted to bring those points up.
I think those are excellent points, brother. And I think just that perspective of how we see history is so important, because if we understand that it works in that cycle and see history from that perspective, then you're right. We should study history, because many times we're just reflecting, or we're going through the same cycle of our ancestors. And if we can identify those road marks, then we can make a different turn, or we can do something different at that junction, you know? And I think, of course, I really think many times here in the world we're living in presently, there is almost, as you pointed out, a rejection of history. And it's a disconnect from history. And I think, of course, that's intentional, you know, as we're talking about having this conversation. Is on purpose. They want to disconnect from history, because if you look at history, you learn the lessons of the past. That's the idea of Sankofa. But the idea is that when you're disconnected from your history, basically you find yourself going through a world lacking knowledge and understanding of what you're seeing. And you know, and when you used the analogy of the tree earlier, I just thought about, you know, in history, people pass down knowledge of the past. And if you have someone who is very knowledgeable of nature, for example, and when they go out into the nature and they walking through the fields or through the forest, they see with different eyes because they have knowledge that has been passed down to them. See, they see more than just trees and woods and stuff. They see trees that have healing properties. They see things that can be utilized to eat, things that may be poisonous. And I'm saying that when you have someone, an elder, or someone from the past who have recorded this and passed it down, then that gives us eyes to see things differently as we're moving down this journey of life. And I think it's so important, therefore, that we really take account of talking with our elders, because they've seen a lot what we've seen, you know, as young people. And of course, we're getting up in age and we want our children to have knowledge of what we have seen, so they'll be better prepared when they come to that point in history. And I think that is the continuation in the reconnection of history, so you can see, again, as you pointed out, that cycle, that continuation of history. It's not just a beginning and end, it's a continuation.
Indeed. You know, when you were just saying that, one thing I thought about is that, you know, brothers in my nation has shared with me, made us believe as young people, or think that we could bypass certain years by listening and speaking to the older brothers. You can jump over a couple years in wisdom and experience by listening and bearing witness to the elders and to the older people that could give you information that could help you bypass a certain obstacle. And I think that that's true as well, because wisdom is not measured by age, however, through a person's perspective, information, and experience. And so sometimes we can learn from not making certain mistakes. Sometimes you can learn from other people's mistakes. And that's also one of the benefits of knowing history, because you don't know where a person slipped and fell if you haven't studied the past. And so I just think that it's really key and important. And I'm proud to be a person steeped in history that's constantly learning. I know that it keeps me young by continuing to learn and educate myself. I feel like that I grow in my understanding. And I'm proud to be a person that values education in a way that's not from a formal institution as well, because the only place to be educated is not a school. You know, the world is my school. I'm forever a student, and I love to learn. And I truly do value the information that we share. I value the information that people bring to us. I personally love stories in general. So that's one of the reasons I love history too, because even as a child, I just like stories. When my grandma would talk, I'll pull up a chair, get my popcorn. I want to hear all about it. And that's how I've always been. And so I'm happy to be that type of person, and I value history.
And I think, it raises a question, and I'll ask you, and then we can, you know, what do you think was that those things that really help you to connect and understand the importance of history, that has brought you to the point of that you find the need to know history and the joy and importance of that history, you know?
I personally have always been one thing for sure. I love juicy details. So that's one thing. And when I found out real history and stories, they are better than any fictional tale you can make up. That's one thing. The stories are so enlightening and interesting if you really get a chance to delve into them most of the times. That is better than any fiction, any movie you could ever make up. So that was the first thing. But the other thing is that as I got older, I was amazed by my own ignorance. I was shocked when I heard things that I didn't know, and I didn't like that feeling. So I never wanted to be on the outside anymore. I wanted to learn so I wouldn't be shocked when I heard information, because certain things that I started learning when I became an adult, I was a little resentful that I hadn't learned them before. And I said, I don't ever want that feeling again. I want to be in the know. I want to be aware. I don't want to be shocked by something that should be average information to me. So those are things that kind of sparked me. What about yourself?
Likewise, on that second point, I think really have really moved me to really appreciate history and to study history. You know, when you think you're educated, and I mean, we all go through this process of education, or Dr. Carter G. Woodson, miseducation, but we go through this process and we are thinking that we are learning, we are learned people, we are lettered people, but we get down to a point and someone comes and presents information that we had never heard of, never imagined, but we know it to be true. And then it raises curiosity of, if I didn't know that, what else I don't know? And pretty soon it sends us on a path, and that's what happened to me, basically. You know, I had grown up, you know, in South Carolina, went through this educational system, or miseducation system, feeling like I had learned some things. But what I realized, and it happened when I went to New York to visit my uncle and aunt. And they had a house just full of books, for one. And then they had videos and music. And I became aware of all this history about us as a people I had never heard of. I learned about historians that was sharing this history that I never heard of. I started reading books that I never knew existed. And then it just opened up that, look here, it's so much more to learn in this world when it comes to us as a people. And I think that kind of set me on the path to really going into seeking history, specifically looking at our history as a people. And I think because of that, the second part of that is that, you know, and I think both of us have this tendency, is that, look here, what we learn, we want to share. So the idea is that if we learn something, how can we share it with others? Because if I didn't know it, maybe other people don't know this information. And the last thing I say, you know, I learned about the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey when I was 24 years of age, brother. Now, some people may say, well, that's good to learn about him at that age. I'm saying that we should have babies coming into the world knowing about Marcus Garvey and many of our other great ancestors and what they achieved and accomplished, just knowing about us as a people. We should not have to get down to an age of a new beginning of learning at 24 and learn about these great people. So, you know, as I say, brother, you know, this is, I think, both of our calling, in the sense that we want to seek knowledge of our history, but we want to share that information with others. And I think, you know, as I'm quite sure with you, it brings me great joy and understanding and appreciation of our past, but also it just creates an opportunity to bond with people, because one thing we know, history bonds us too. The past bonds us because we find a commonality in that history, and we realize we're connected in more ways than we recognize, and that history has that potential of doing that, and it does that for us. So, you know, those are the things that really kind of stood out about learning history and the importance of then sharing that history.
Indeed. And that's great. And I do agree. It does bond us, and it makes me think about our relationship. I know the foundation of it really was history. The first time we met, you know, Brother Anthony had brought me to a play that you had, the Mafa Saruda. And that was my first time, you know, seeing you. And it wasn't just meeting you like shaking your hand. I got to see your thoughts on stage, and that made me look at you from a different perspective, because I felt like I got a chance to learn a little bit about you from a play, you know. And so that was our first experience, and that's been one of the things that's kept us connected, is us as a people.
No doubt, because when you think about that, brother, I mean, and particularly with our company and the work that we have done, we've gone on a journey pretty much together. Because we go in and look at this information, then we have these dialogues about, you know, this information, extracting lessons from it, and then, of course, ultimately sharing it with others, you know. And that's what the film, you know, Walk on the River, the Black History of San Antonio has done. You know, we walked that journey together, researching, documenting that story, listening to elders tell the story, you know, then putting it in a format in a film that now we share with the world and the community. So this is a great journey, but and I say, brother, I think it goes back to say that, on these, two quotes here, just understanding how we, our struggle is to reclaim our humanity. And part of that is understanding our history, for sure. We have to understand and know our history. The other part is that we have to share our history because it helps restore the human family, I believe, because right now, people are walking around with less than the full story, much less than the full story. And I think the key to that is that we have to uncover, reveal, and share the full story for those who want to know the full truth. So a part of it is a calling for all of us to some degree, and you pointed out, even with our personal history, our family history, it begins maybe there, but then the family history expands to our community, national, international history as a people. But we're going to have to restore those missing pages in history so the world will know who we really are.
Indeed. And I think that brings us, we're winding down the time, so I think that that's a good way to kind of cap us off. Thank you all for joining us, those of you who have. Once again, this is our third consecutive Tuesday. We got one more next week, and then after that, we'll make a decision if we're going to stick to this time frame or move it to another time frame. But I like to say I definitely enjoy the conversations, and I think it's a good way, once again, just for us to provide our audience with something. I see someone has a comment here in the chat. Let me try to pull that up. Since this is a different format than your Sunday presentation, I'd like to know if you allow participants to comment. Absolutely. If you have something to say, feel free to go ahead and turn on your microphone, and you definitely can speak.
Hi, thank you. I didn't want to say anything, just in case. I saw your last one on language, and then this one as well in terms of erasing history. I know I teach in New York, actually children in museums, and so this is what we do: teach history, teach, and have children think. But one of the things that I've noticed is if we're from an African diaspora, they've erased our original language. So when you erase people's languages, I've had children question me like, what happened to the Native Americans? Because they saw the maps. And the maps first, it was read over the whole country of the US. And then, of course, as time went on, there were less and less and less until there were about 3 dots left on the maps. And children are not stupid. They see what's visual. And their question was, well, what happened to the Native Americans? And so that's what they even did to Native Americans, put them in special schools and take away their language. So I just wanted to know from both of you, what do you think in terms of us losing our original language? Language is a part of your culture. I also teach ASL, and it's a visual language, so it's different, but it's so much a part of the culture. So when you've taken away people's languages, you've taken away part of their culture. So what's your opinion on that? I mean, most of us just speak English now, in this country. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you for that. Go ahead, Aundar.
And I think when we had that conversation about language, one of the things we acknowledged was the fact that through our Holocaust, of course, we have been robbed of our language. And of course, we're standing here presently today, as you just pointed out, Ms. Karen, that really we're looking at, we're speaking this English language. And I think the point that at least that I wanted to share when we had that conversation is that we have to claim the language that we're speaking now. Now, it's good to go back and reclaim our ancestors' language, if that's Swahili or Fon or whatever the language may be, but we have to reclaim or claim the language that we speak now and make it positive and affirming for us as a people, You know, and I think in that conversation, we talked about just taking words and making sure that we use language that empowers us, encourages us, and unifies us. So, for example, using just the idea of referring to each other as brothers and sisters. I mean, it's the English language, but it has a whole different impact on us when we talk to each other in that regard. Using the word Black in a positive, uplifting, affirming way, because we know how in society, in the English language, Black is misdefined. So the idea, I think, is claiming the language that we speak and using it in a way that empowers us. At the same time, I think it is good to go back and look at some of those languages, because I know there's been a movement where the language, the Pan-African, at the Pan-African Conference, they had said that the Swahili would become the Pan-African language, and they was encouraging people of African descent in diaspora to learn Swahili. And I think, of course, if you're familiar with Kwanzaa, that's where you start to hear some terms of words in Swahili. But the idea, and I think is, again, is the key to me, is that we take what we have right now, ultimately wanting to get back to what we once had, but using the tools that we have, which is this English language, and using it in a way that impacts us in a positive way. And hopefully that gives you some insight, at least my perspective on trying to deal with language. Because, you know, I've worked with youth, and one of the things that we have always tried to do is to go into and redefine some words that and reuse words that really help the young people understand who we are as a people. Like, for instance, again, you know, just using the term of being African in relationship to other names that we may call each other. So it really is a struggle to, again, take the language that we have and to make sure that it speaks to us as a people. And we can do that. And we all have done that, particularly in history. I think during the 60s, we really started to reclaim our history, our language, using the English language. And at the same time, it was an effort to, of course, reconnect us with a African language. But you're right, language is part of the culture. And of course, we know many times when you lose your language, you lose an aspect of your culture, because some words are not translated, you know, from one culture to another as it is said. And of course, that's a struggle. But the idea is, again, taking what we have now and using it. Do you have anything else, Miss Karen?
Thank you. That was my main point, because, as you said, I've had to translate different words, even from, you know, Japanese to English to sign, and you know, and it's very hard to translate the exact meaning. So I know our ancestors had certain words, certain gestures, certain things that were unique to us. Mm. And so when I speak to young people, I say, first of all, like you said, learn English, learn English well. Because many people now, they write the same way that they speak. And so they're right there. There's a difference. Okay. And so when you go back to the ancestors, then you can really appreciate it. So that's why I mention it. So thank you. Yes, you hit it right on the head. You know, it's not always an exact translation, but it means so much. We may have 10 different words just for family.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, family, I just want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us as we have, of course, really looked at this idea of history, the importance of history, and taking these quotes. But we encourage, as always, that whenever we have these conversations, we invite these conversations to expand beyond here, and that we hope that these conversations will become part of our history. So again, thank you so much for joining us this Tuesday, and we look forward to hopefully having you next week as we continue these Black conversations. And that's Hotel Peace. Greetings to all.